The doctor's hands shook every time he delivered a baby until someone asked about his own missing children. The morning sun beat down on the dusty streets of Clearwater, but inside Doc Samuel Hartwell's clinic, shadows lived in every corner. He stood at the wash basin, watching his hands shake in the warm water. The trembling started in his fingertips and worked its way up through his wrists like ripples on a pond after someone throws a stone. 3 years now. 3 years since his hands had betrayed him, and still he couldn't make them stop. The water turned pink as he scrubbed. Mrs. Patterson had delivered her 4th child just before dawn, a healthy boy who came into the world screaming his lungs out. Samuel should have felt the old satisfaction, the quiet pride that came with bringing new life safely into the world. Instead, all he felt was the familiar weight in his chest, heavy as river stones. He dried his hands on a clean towel, but they kept shaking. They always did. The bell above his door chimed, and Samuel looked up to see Tom Brady stepping inside. The sheriff's boots left dusty prints on the wooden floor, and his hat sat crooked on his gray head. Tom had been bringing his problems to Samuel for 15 years, ever since a rustler's bullet had taken a chunk out of his shoulder. Morning document. Tom's voice carried the weariness of a man who'd seen too much. Heard you were up all night again. Samuel nodded, not trusting his voice. He turned away and began organizing his instruments, trying to keep his hands busy. The forceps clinked against each other, a soft metallic song that filled the quiet. That makes 17 babies this year, Tom said, settling his weight against the doorframe. Folks are grateful, you know, even if the words hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Even if your hands shake. Even if you're not the same man you used to be. Even if something broke inside you that won't heal. Samuel picked up a scalpel, studied its clean edge. His reflection stared back from the metal, warped and strange. Was there something you needed, Tom? Just checking on you. The sheriff's voice was gentle. Mary's worried. Says you haven't been eating much. Mary Brady ran the general store with her husband, and she had a mother's heart for anyone who looked too thin or too quiet. She'd been leaving covered dishes on Samuel's porch for months now, always with a note that said the same thing. Eat something, you stubborn old goat. I'm fine. The lie came easy now. Samuel had been practicing it for 3 years. Tom shifted his weight, and the floorboards creaked under his boots. Doc, you know if you ever want to talk. I said I'm fine. The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled tight. Outside, a wagon rattled down Main Street, and somewhere a dog was barking. Normal sounds of a normal morning in a normal town. But nothing felt normal to Samuel anymore. Tom cleared his throat. Well, I'll leave you be. But Doc, you might want to know. There's a woman coming in on the evening stage. Word is she's expecting, and she's got nowhere else to go. Samuel's hands tightened around the scalpel. Another birth. Another chance for his trembling fingers to fail when someone needed him most. I'll be ready. After Tom left, Samuel sat down in a chair and stared out the window. The view hadn't changed in the 15 years he'd been in Clearwater. Same dusty street, same wooden sidewalks, same false front buildings that made the town look bigger than it was. But everything felt different now, like seeing the world through clouded glass. He remembered when his hands had been steady, when he could thread a needle in dim lamplight and never miss. When he could deliver a difficult birth without wondering if his shaking would put mother and child at risk. Those days felt like someone else's life now, a story he'd heard long ago and only half remembered. The clinic smelled of carbolic acid and soap, clean scents that should have been comforting. Instead, they reminded him of other smells he couldn't forget. Smoke and ash and the terrible sweetness of burned wood. The smell of a life going up in flames while he was miles away, bringing someone else's child into the world. A fly buzzed against the window, trapped between the glass and the outside world. Samuel watched it for a long time, thinking about prisons you couldn't see. The afternoon passed slowly. A few townspeople stopped by with minor ailments, a cut finger, a persistent cough, a child's fever that broke with cool cloths and willow bark tea. Samuel treated them all with the same careful attention he'd always given, but his hand shook through every examination, every bandage, every dose of medicine measured out in careful spoonfuls. Mrs. Henderson brought her youngest boy in with a splinter in his thumb. Samuel removed it with steady movements despite the trembling, cleaned the wound, and wrapped it in clean cloth. The boy watched his hands with wide eyes, but said nothing. Children were honest that way. They saw what they saw and didn't pretend otherwise. "There now, Jimmy," Samuel said, his voice gentle. "Keep it clean and dry, and it'll heal just fine." The boy nodded and ran out to where his mother waited. Samuel heard them talking on the porch, Mrs. Henderson's voice low and worried. He couldn't make out the words, but he knew what she was saying. The same thing everyone said when they thought he couldn't hear. What happened to Doc Hartwell? Why do his hands shake like that? Is he still safe to trust with our children? As evening approached, Samuel prepared for the woman Tom had mentioned. He laid out clean sheets on the examination table, boiled his instruments, and made sure he had everything he might need. His hands shook through all of it, but he'd learned to work around the trembling, to compensate for what he'd lost. The stage was late, as it usually was. Samuel waited by the window, watching the empty street fill with shadows. A few windows glowed with lamplight, and smoke rose from chimneys in thin gray lines. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonesome sound that seemed to echo his own heart. When the stage finally rumbled into town, Samuel felt the familiar tightness in his chest. Another birth to face. Another test of hands that had forgotten how to be still. Another night of wondering if this would be the time his shaking finally cost a life. The woman who climbed down from the stage was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and eyes that held too many secrets. She moved carefully, one hand pressed to her rounded belly, and Samuel could see she was close to her time. Very close. She looked around the dusty street with the expression of someone who'd run out of choices. Her dress was worn but clean, and she carried a small traveling bag that looked like it held everything she owned in the world. Samuel stepped out onto the porch, his hands already starting to shake at the thought of what lay ahead. The woman looked up at him, and for a moment, their eyes met across the space between his clinic and the street. In that moment, Samuel saw something he recognized. The look of someone carrying a weight too heavy for one person to bear alone. The woman's name was Martha Colson, and she spoke it like it was borrowed from someone else. Samuel watched her climb the steps to his clinic, moving with the careful slowness of a person carrying precious cargo. Her dress was the color of prairie dust, and her shoes had walked more miles than they were made for. "Are you the doctor?" Her voice was steady, but Samuel could hear the pain underneath it. Labor pains, starting low and building like summer thunder. "I am." Samuel's hands were already trembling, anticipating what was to come. "When did the pain start?" "An hour ago. Maybe less." Martha pressed her palm against the small of her back and breathed slow and deep. "I was told you were the only doctor for 50 miles. Samuel nodded and stepped aside to let her in. The clinic felt smaller with another person in it, especially someone whose very presence reminded him why his hands shook. "Let's get you settled. The baby's coming tonight." He prepared the back room while Martha sat in the waiting area, her breathing growing more deliberate with each passing minute. Samuel laid out clean sheets, filled the basin with hot water, and arranged his instruments with the practiced movements of a man who'd done this hundreds of times. But his hands shook through all of it, trembling like leaves in a storm he couldn't calm. "Doctor!" Martha's voice came from the doorway, and when Samuel turned, she was watching him with curious eyes. Not frightened eyes like most women had when they saw his shaking hands. Just curious. "Are you all right?" The question caught Samuel off guard. Most people pretended not to notice his condition, dancing around it like stepping over broken glass. "I'm fine. Just preparing for the delivery." Martha nodded, but she kept watching him. "I've never seen a doctor's hands shake like that. Does it hurt?" Samuel paused in arranging his instruments. No one had ever asked him that before. "No, it doesn't hurt." "Then why do they shake?" The pain hit her then, a hard contraction that made her double over and grip the doorframe. Samuel moved to her side, his own discomfort forgotten in the face of her need. "Let's get you to the bed. This baby's not waiting for polite conversation." The next few hours passed in the strange, timeless way of difficult births. Martha labored with quiet determination, never crying out even when the pains came hard and fast. Samuel worked by lamplight, his trembling hands somehow finding their way through familiar motions. He delivered so many babies that his fingers seemed to remember what to do even when his mind was full of worry. But this birth was different. Martha watched him throughout it all, her eyes clear even in the worst moments. When his hands shook while checking the baby's position, she didn't look away. When he fumbled with the forceps, she didn't gasp in fear. She just watched, like she was studying a puzzle she meant to solve. "You're very good at this," she said during a quiet moment between contractions, even with your hands shaking. Samuel didn't know what to say to that. He focused on preparing the next set of instruments, trying to keep them steady in his grip. "I've had practice. How many babies have you delivered?" "I stopped counting at 300. The admission slipped out before Samuel could stop it. He rarely talked about his work, not anymore. Martha smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. 300. That's a lot of new life brought into the world. Another contraction took her then, stronger than the others. Samuel could see the baby's head crowning, dark hair slick with birth fluids. His hands shook as he prepared to guide the child into the world. But Martha reached out and caught his wrist. "Doctor," she said, her voice steady even through the pain. "Look at me." Samuel met her eyes, surprised by the calm he found there. "What happened to your own children?" The question hit Samuel like a physical blow. He stared at Martha, his mouth opening but no words coming out. In 30 years of practicing medicine, no one had ever asked him that. Not directly, not with such gentle certainty that he'd had children of his own. Samuel's voice cracked. "How did you?" A man doesn't deliver babies the way you do unless he knows what it means to love a child. Martha's grip on his wrist tightened as another contraction built. And a man's hands don't shake like yours unless something terrible happened to the children he loved. Samuel felt something break open inside his chest, something he'd kept locked away for 3 years. "They died," he whispered, "in a fire. 5 years ago." Martha nodded like she'd known all along. "And you weren't there." "I was delivering Mrs. Campbell's son. 20 miles away." The words came out in a rush now, 3 years of silence breaking like a dam. Sarah tried to get the boys out, but the smoke, by the time I got home, there was nothing left but ash and memories. The baby chose that moment to come, sliding into Samuel's trembling hands with a rush of blood and fluid. For a heartbeat, the child was silent, and Samuel felt the familiar panic rise in his throat. Then the baby took its first breath and let out a cry that filled the small room with life. Samuel's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the child. Martha reached up and covered his hands with her own, steadying them both as they cradled the newborn together. "It's a girl," Samuel managed to say. "She's perfect." Martha smiled through her exhaustion, but she didn't take her eyes off Samuel's face. "What were their names?" "Your boys." "Jacob and Thomas." Speaking their names aloud felt like opening a wound, but also like letting poison drain out. "They were 7 years old. Twins. They would be proud of you," Martha said softly, "knowing how many children you've brought safely into the world, how many mothers you've helped." Samuel cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a soft blanket, his hands still trembling, but somehow more manageable now. He placed the child in Martha's arms and watched her face transform with wonder and love. It was a look he remembered from 5 years ago, from the night his own sons were born. "Why did you ask?" Samuel found himself saying. "About my children?" Martha looked up from her daughter's face. "Because I could see the love in your hands, even with all that shaking. And I could see the grief too. Sometimes it helps to speak the grief aloud, even to a stranger." Samuel nodded, not trusting his voice. He'd busied himself with cleaning up, but his movements felt different now. Lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying a weight he hadn't realized was there. "Doctor," Martha's voice was quiet in the lamplight. "What happens now? To me and the baby?" Samuel looked at the woman who'd asked the question no one else had dared to ask, who'd seen his shaking hands and his broken heart and hadn't turned away. She had nowhere to go, no family waiting, no husband to provide for her and the child. She was alone in the world except for the baby in her arms. Just like he was alone except for his memories and his trembling hands and his need to keep bringing life into a world that had taken everything from him. Martha stayed. That simple fact surprised Samuel more than anything that had happened in 3 years. Most women left his clinic within hours of giving birth, eager to get home to family and familiar walls. But Martha had nowhere to go, and when Samuel offered her the small room behind the clinic until she was strong enough to travel, she accepted with quiet gratitude. "I can help," she said on the second morning, watching Samuel struggle to prepare breakfast with his shaking hands. "I'm good with cooking and cleaning, and I know something about tending sick folks." Samuel paused in his attempt to crack eggs into a skillet. "You should be resting. You just had a baby. Rest is a luxury I've never been able to afford." Martha took the eggs from his trembling fingers, her touch gentle but sure. "Besides, little Anna sleeps most of the day. I need something to keep my hands busy." Anna. She'd named the baby Anna, after her own mother, she said. Samuel watched Martha move around his small kitchen with easy confidence, cracking eggs and slicing bread like she'd been doing it in this space for years instead of days. The baby slept in a basket by the window, tiny fists curled against her cheeks. "Where will you go?" Samuel asked. "When you're ready to leave?" Martha didn't answer right away. She concentrated on cooking the eggs, her face turned away from his. "I haven't decided yet. Maybe west to California. I hear there's work there for women willing to do it." Something in her voice told Samuel there was more to the story, but he didn't push. Everyone had secrets. His were just harder to hide, written in the tremor of his hands every time he touched another person's pain. Over the following days, Martha proved herself useful in ways Samuel hadn't expected. She had a gentle way with patients, especially the children who came in frightened and hurting. While Samuel's shaking hands made them nervous, Martha's calm presence soothed their fears. She held them while Samuel examined cuts and fevers, told them stories while he cleaned wounds and applied bandages. "You're good at this," Samuel told her one afternoon after she'd helped him treat a boy with a broken arm. "Have you worked with doctors before?" Martha was washing the instruments, her movements careful and precise. "My father was a preacher. I spent a lot of time visiting sick folks with him." "You learned things, watching people hurt and heal." He died 2 years ago. Fever took him one winter. Martha dried the instruments and placed them back in their proper spots. "My mother passed when I was 16. After that, it was just me and Papa." Samuel nodded, understanding the weight of being alone. "I'm sorry. We all lose people," Martha said simply. "The trick is figuring out how to keep living after they're gone." That evening, as they sat in the clinic's main room with Anna sleeping in her basket between them, Samuel found himself talking. Really talking for the first time in 3 years. "Sarah loved children," he said, his voice soft in the lamplight. "She wanted a house full of them. When the twins came, she was so happy she cried for 3 days straight. Happy tears, she kept telling me. The best kind of tears." Martha looked up from the baby blanket she was mending. "Tell me about them." "Jacob and Thomas." Samuel's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee cup. "Jacob was born first, by maybe 5 minutes. Thomas never let him forget it. They were everything." Jacob had Sarah's laugh, this bright sound that could fill a room. And Thomas was curious about everything, always asking questions, always taking things apart to see how they worked. "They sound wonderful." They were. Samuel stared into his coffee, seeing faces in the dark liquid. The night they died, Mrs. Campbell was having trouble with her birth. Breech baby, bleeding that wouldn't stop. I thought I had to choose between helping her or going home with my family. I chose to stay." Martha's needle paused in its work. "You saved her life." "Yes, and lost everything that mattered to me." Samuel's voice cracked. "By the time I got home, the whole house was gone. The neighbors said Sarah tried to get the boys out, but the smoke was too thick. They found them in the boys' bedroom, all 3 of them together. The silence that followed was heavy with grief and understanding." Anna stirred in her basket, making small baby sounds before settling back to sleep. "I delivered Mrs. Campbell's son that night," Samuel continued. Healthy boy. Came into the world screaming like he owned it. And all I could think was, this child gets to live while mine are dying. This stranger's baby gets a chance while Jacob and Thomas. He couldn't finish the sentence. Martha set down her mending and moved to the chair beside Samuel. She didn't touch him, but her presence was warm and steady. Is that why your hands shake? Because you blame yourself? Samuel nodded, not trusting his voice. Samuel. Martha's use of his first name surprised him. She'd been calling him doctor since she arrived. Look at me. He raised his eyes to meet hers, expecting to see pity there. Instead, he found something deeper. Understanding. Shared pain. The fire wasn't your fault, Martha said. And saving Mrs. Campbell's baby wasn't wrong. You can't heal the whole world, but you can heal the piece of it that's put in front of you. That's what you were doing that night. That's what you do every day. But my family will want you to keep healing people, would want you to keep bringing babies safely into the world. Martha's voice was gentle but firm. Grief is love with nowhere to go, but it doesn't have to poison everything it touches. Samuel felt tears he hadn't shed in 3 years burning behind his eyes. I miss them so much it feels like dying. I know. Martha's own voice was thick with unshed tears. I know what it feels like to lose everything and have to keep breathing anyway. Something in her tone made Samuel look at her more carefully. Martha, what happened to you? Before you came here? Martha was quiet for so long that Samuel thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I worked at a bank in Denver. Kept the books, counted the money. I was good at numbers, and I was honest. Too honest, maybe. She picked up her mending again, her fingers working automatically. There was a man, the bank president's son. He said he loved me, said we'd be married. I believed him. Samuel waited, sensing there was more. When I told him about the baby, he changed. Said I was lying, trying to trap him. Said no one would believe me over him. Martha's voice grew harder. He was right. When I kept insisting the child was his, he accused me of stealing money from the bank. Made it look like I'd been taking small amounts for months. Had you? No. But he was good with numbers too, and he had help from people who mattered more than I did. So I ran. Martha looked down at Anna, sleeping peacefully in her basket. I've been running for months, tried to stay ahead of the law and the shame both. Samuel felt a surge of anger at the injustice of it, but also recognition. So we're both carrying guilt for things that weren't our fault. Martha smiled sadly. Seems that way. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two broken people sharing the weight of their separate griefs. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and making the lamplight flicker. Anna slept on, safe in her basket, unaware of the storms that had brought her parents to this moment. Martha, Samuel said finally, you don't have to keep running. You could stay here. Help me with the clinic. There's always work for someone with gentle hands and a kind heart. Martha looked up from her mending, hope and fear warring in her eyes. What if they find me? What if they come looking? Samuel thought about his shaking hands, about the guilt he'd carried for 3 years, about the way Martha's presence had begun to ease something inside him he'd thought was permanently broken. Then we'll face it together, he said. Sometimes the best medicine isn't what you give to others. Sometimes it's what you allow others to give to you. 3 weeks passed like pages in a book Samuel had forgotten how to read. Martha stayed, and with her staying came something Samuel hadn't felt in years, the simple pleasure of not being alone. She worked beside him in the clinic with steady hands and a gentle voice, and at night they sat together in the lamplight, sharing stories of their dead and their dreams for tomorrow. His hands still shook, but less now. When Mrs. Patterson came in with her youngest boy running a fever, Samuel's fingers barely trembled as he examined the child's throat. When old Tom Brady needed his shoulder checked again, Samuel's hands were almost steady as he felt for swelling and pain. You're getting better, Martha said one evening as they cleaned the instruments together. Anna slept in her basket by the stove, 6 weeks old now and growing stronger every day. It's because of you, Samuel said, and meant it. Having someone to talk to, someone who understands, it helps. Martha smiled, but there was sadness in it. I wish I could believe it would last. Before Samuel could ask what she meant, The bell above the front door chimed. Late visitors usually meant emergency calls, so Samuel dried his hands and went to see who needed help. But the man standing in his waiting room wasn't a patient. He was tall and lean, with gray eyes that looked like winter sky and a badge pinned to his vest. His clothes were dusty from travel, and his hand rested easy on the gun at his hip. When he saw Samuel, he touched the brim of his hat in polite greeting. "Evening, Doctor. I'm Marshall Clayton from Denver. I'm looking for a woman named Martha Colson. I was told she might be here." Samuel's heart went cold. Behind him, he heard Martha's sharp intake of breath, heard the sound of a plate slipping from her hands and breaking on the floor. The marshal's eyes moved past Samuel to where Martha stood frozen in the doorway to the back room. "Miss Colson," the marshal said, his voice calm and professional. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement. You need to come with me." "No." The word came out of Samuel before he could stop it. "She didn't steal anything." Marshal Clayton's eyes shifted back to Samuel, measuring him like a problem to be solved. "This is a legal matter, Doctor. The woman is a fugitive from justice. The Denver National Bank is missing $300, and the evidence points to Miss Colson." "What evidence?" Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between the marshal and Martha. "What proof do you have besides the word of a man who refused to take responsibility for his own child?" The marshal's eyebrows rose slightly. "She told you about that, did she? About her relationship with young Mr. Patterson?" "Patterson, the same name as the woman whose fourth child Samuel had delivered just weeks ago." Samuel felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together, none of them forming a picture he liked. "I know enough," Samuel said. "I know she's a good woman who was wronged by a man with more power than honor. I know she's been helping me save lives for weeks now, and I know she never stole a cent from anybody." "That's not for you to decide, Doctor." The marshal's voice stayed calm, but his hand shifted slightly closer to his gun. "Now step aside. I don't want trouble, but I'll take her with me one way or another." Samuel looked back at Martha. She was holding Anna against her chest, tears streaming down her face, but her chin set with the same determination he'd seen the night she gave birth. She wasn't going to run. She was going to face whatever came, for her daughter's sake, if not her own. "Martha," Samuel said softly, "you don't have to go. We can fight this." She shook her head. "He has papers, Samuel. Legal papers. And I'm tired of running." She kissed Anna's forehead and looked up at Samuel with eyes full of love and regret. "Take care of her. Please. She deserves a better start than I can give her." "No." Samuel turned back to the marshal, his hand starting to shake again, but his voice steady. "You want to arrest someone for theft?" "Arrest me?" Marshal Clayton frowned. "What are you talking about, Doctor?" Samuel's mind was racing, but his voice came out calm and clear. "I've been keeping the books for Miss Colson's work here at the clinic, paying her wages out of what I charge patients. If money's missing from her time at the bank, then I must have made an error in my accounting. Doctors aren't known for their skill with numbers." "Samuel, no." Martha stepped forward, but Samuel held up a hand to stop her. "It's true, Marshal. I've been so distracted by my condition that I've made several mistakes with money lately. If there's a discrepancy in Miss Colson's accounts, it's because I asked her to help me straighten out my own books, and we got confused about what money belonged where." The marshal looked between them, clearly not believing a word, but also clearly recognizing a problem. "Doctor, filing a false report is also a crime." "Then I guess you have a choice to make," Samuel said. "Arrest a new mother with a baby, or arrest the town's only doctor. Wonder which one the people of Clearwater would rather you take back to Denver to stand trial." The silence stretched out like a rope pulled tight. Outside, Samuel could hear the normal sounds of evening. Dogs barking, a wagon creaking past, someone calling goodnight to a neighbor. Normal life going on while everything Samuel cared about hung in the balance. Finally, Marshal Clayton sighed and let his hand fall away from his gun. "This isn't over, Doctor. I'll be making inquiries. If I find out you're lying, you'll find out I'm a man who makes mistakes with numbers and cares more about his patients than his paperwork," Samuel said. "Nothing illegal about either of those things." The marshal looked at Martha one more time, then back at Samuel. "You're making a mistake protecting her. Men like James Patterson don't forget when they're crossed." "Men like James Patterson don't matter to me," Samuel said. "What matters is doing what's right." After the marshal left, Samuel and Martha stood in the quiet clinic, holding each other's gaze across the space where their old lives had just ended and their new one had begun. "You didn't have to do that," Martha said, her voice thick with tears. "You didn't have to risk everything for us." Samuel walked over to her and gently took Anna from her arms. The baby looked up at him with dark eyes that reminded him of another child, another time when he'd held new life in his shaking hands and marveled at the miracle of it. "Yes, I did," he said. "I spent 3 years letting guilt poison my hands every time I try to heal someone. I'm not going to let fear stop me from protecting the people I love." Martha's eyes widened at the word love, but Samuel didn't take it back. He looked down at Anna, sleeping peacefully in his arms, and felt his hands grow steady for the first time since the night his own sons died. "We're a family now," he said simply. "All 3 of us. And families protect each other, no matter what it costs." Outside, the marshal's horse carried him back toward the main road, but Samuel barely noticed. He was too busy watching Martha smile through her tears, too busy feeling Anna's tiny hand curl around his finger, too busy discovering that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from what you give up, but from what you choose to hold on to. His hands were steady now, not because the guilt was gone, but because he'd found something stronger than guilt. He'd found love worth fighting for, and hope worth the risk of losing everything else. In the end, that was the best medicine of all.